In this whiteboard lesson, I'm going to take you through some of the key practices that can help you double your academic writing quality. And I teach this in a lot more detail in the full course on how to double your academic writing quality. So how do we think about academic writing? Well, I like to think about it in the following way. When you are having a conversation with somebody, gone to a coffee shop, or you just bumped into them in the corridor, or a family member at home, for example, you experience the luxury of real-time feedback. Okay, so you're speaking to somebody and most likely they're responding back to you on a very regular basis, and you're able to ensure that you're being understood in that conversation by moderating what you're saying based on their feedback. So in a conversation, you have what's called this real-time feedback. Now, as a writer, you are also having a form of conversation with your reader, but you're not getting any real-time feedback. Now, you will get feedback at some point, but it'll only be often once you've submitted something or after a much longer period of time than you would be able to get feedback in your conversation. So it's very important that you still see this as some sort of human engagement between two people where you are communicating something, and you need to make sure that what you're communicating is being understood. You have the luxury in a conversation of calibrating or changing what you're saying based on that feedback. But in writing, you don't have the real-time feedback. So that's the difference. And this is the scenario here that you need to be thinking about as a writer. You're communicating largely in one direction. But what is important is that you are still as clear and unambiguous in what it is that you want to communicate as if you were having a real conversation with somebody. So what is our ultimate goal in academic writing? It is to make sure that we are being unambiguous. Okay? And I'm going to take this part of the whiteboard over here and take you through 4 very useful practices. And I've been teaching these in a postgrad workshop that I run every year at my institution called Wits University, and these are always very well received, and they are practical, actionable steps that you can take to improve your academic writing, both as you are writing and once you've written something. When you go back and edit it, you can still apply these practices over here. So we're going to look at 4 practices to ultimately make you a better writer, but which should help your reader understand exactly what it is that you're saying without you having to explain it or to give some sort of voiceover, because you're not able to do that. If you imagine you're handing in your thesis or your dissertation, you don't even know who your examiner is. They are going to read your report, and if you're not able to write clearly and unambiguously using these practices, then your examiner is going to lose the essence of what it is that you're trying to say. And unfortunately, the feedback that comes back is not going to be that positive. So we want to learn these practices to make sure that you can be a better writer, and so that you can write unambiguously and get excellent feedback from your reader at the end of the day. So the first practice is, number 1, real subjects. Now, we learned this at school. A subject is a person, an object, or a place. And I want you to go back and look at your writing in your next piece of writing, next piece of academic writing, whatever it is, and be your own editor and have a look at how many times you've made your nouns a little bit too abstract. And we tend to complicate subjects which are at the beginning of a sentence. A subject does an action on an object. We learned all of this back at school. When we get to postgraduate studies, even undergraduate studies, we tend to think that we need to make our writing a bit more complex than it needs to be. And while you must never oversimplify the important depth of the subject or the topic that you're writing about, there's no reason to make your writing any more complicated than it absolutely has to be in order to communicate unambiguously. So the first practice over here is real subjects. And I spend an entire lesson on exactly that practice in the course and go into a lot more detail and take you through a couple of examples of that. And yes, you may think this is a school lesson. It is applicable to school level, but it's equally applicable to all of us at any stage of our careers, at any stage of our academic progress. And myself, I often also make these mistakes with my writing. And the second practice is very similar to this one. You should, in your writing, be using real actions. Now, this one is an interesting one because we tend to what's called nominalize actions. So we tend to take a verb and we convert it into the noun. So let's go for a couple of examples. So we might talk about the decision, okay? Instead of just talking about the verb decide or decided in whatever tense it needs to be used. So rather use the word decide than decision. Because when you use a nominalized verb, you tend to have to use extra words around it, and those pronouns tend to clutter your sentences a bit. A couple more examples. So use the word failed versus failure. So the mayor failed to hold his subjects accountable is a simpler way of saying the failure of the mayor to hold his subjects accountable resulted in X, Y, Z. So use the simpler, real, tangible form of the action or the verb rather than the nominalized noun version of it. Okay, let's do a couple of other examples. Resist rather than resistance. And again, I want you just to go back into your own writing and see whether you've fallen into the trap of overcomplicating your subjects or making your subjects anything other than a person, an object, or a place. Or if the verbs that should be active in your sentences have been nominalized, have been turned into nouns. And in both cases, these are a little bit abstract. A decision is not a person, an object, or a place. Failure, resistance, these are abstract concepts. And it takes more work for your reader to decipher them and understand what it is that you're talking about. If you just talk about the verb to resist, the verb to fail, the verb to decide, it's much easier to attach a subject to that verb and for that verb to be active on the object. It just makes your writing much clearer and more meaningful for your reader over here. And remember, that reader is the most important person that we need to be thinking about when we're writing. Okay, another example is use the word serve rather than service. And I'm not saying in all cases you have to decompose a nominalized verb back to its original form. There are obviously some instances where it would be necessary and perhaps important to use that form of the verb. But what I've found in coaching postgraduates and teaching this workshop for 5 years, I have found that people write and then they find their writing is a little bit ambiguous or a little bit complex or dense. And it's interesting, we can always identify other people's writing when it's a bit dense and complex. And these are two practices here that often lead to that little bit more dense or complicated form of writing. And then let's go through two more practices at the bottom over here that will really help you become a better academic writer. So the third practice over here is called old before new. Now, let's go back to our dear reader over there. as they're going through your writing, in their mind, they're having to keep certain concepts be aware of certain concepts as they go through them. If you bombard them with too much too quickly, you're going to tire them out, and subconsciously they will become exhausted from your writing. And you need to solve that problem at the sentence level. You need to make sure that your sentences give your reader information that they're already used to. So what do I mean? Let's take two sentences as an example. Let's say that in our practices over here, we start with a subject, and then there's something that happens, and then we get to the object or another concept at the end of the sentence. And that's our first sentence, and then our second sentence starts off with another concept and ends with another concept. And maybe there's other concepts in there as well. The principle of old before new, and remember all of this is just two sentences here with a set of concepts over there. If this is concept A over here, and this is concept B, right? In the second sentence over here, let's say you wanted to introduce a third concept, C. And remember, when you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, there are a lot of concepts and a lot of information that you are needing to communicate. Remember, you've spent 3 or 4 years of your life building up this knowledge, finding these results and doing this analysis. But how you communicate it to your reader is what's ultimately going to determine your success. And at the sentence level, you can become a better writer and think more about your reader. So in the second sentence, and imagine this is just 2 sentences in a paragraph, you should consciously start off the next sentence with the concept that you just ended it with over there. So concept A, boom, 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 concept B at the end. Then the second sentence reinforces the concept that you've just spoken about at the end of the sentence before you bring in a new concept, C. If you put C at the beginning over here, by the time your readers got to this point, they're holding 3 different concepts in their mind at the same time. But by the same time over here, if you follow this practice, they're only holding 2 concepts in their mind. So you're just giving them just that little bit extra time before you introduce them to a new concept. And if you follow that practice all the way through in your academic writing, you will think about your reader and you'll help them to learn about what it is that you're presenting to them in a much easier fashion. And once again, go into your own writing. If you're busy with a proposal, busy with a thesis, busy with a proposal, busy with any form of academic writing, go and have a look. And I guarantee you'll find this mistake somewhere in your own writing. I do it all the time, and I have to go back and check myself and make sure that I'm not in a rush to keep introducing new topics and new concepts for the reader to try and understand. And there is a tendency, like with these practices over here, to demonstrate some sort of superior knowledge or some sort of complexity in how we write. And that comes through here when we're communicating too much to the reader too often and too quickly. Then the fourth and last practice that I'm going to go through in this whiteboard lesson, a little bit similar to this one over here, is called complexity last. And if you use these together, you can be very powerful. So once again, let me draw out 2 sentences, a concept at the beginning and at the end of the first sentence, and then a concept at the beginning and at the end of the second sentence. All that is just 2 sentences and a couple of concepts that you need to communicate to your reader. So the practice here is that between concept A and B, if you had a choice in how you construct your sentence as to which is more complex and how you sequence them, the more complex concept should be at the end. And it's the same logic as over here. If you give your reader something too difficult to think about too early on, you're consuming the energy that they need subconsciously to understand the concept that you put at the end. They're still too busy trying to understand the first one and not able to even grasp the second one. But if the first one is easy enough for them to grasp, you've built up some confidence in them as they go, that they understand what you've written and they're engaging with it meaningfully. And you're not exhausting them by giving them too many complex subjects too early on. And if you combine that with this over here, you then could reinforce it over here before going on again to another concept at the end. And even if you were only concentrated on one sentence, it's just a generally good practice to make sure that you bring your reader gently in to a complex subject by a easier concept that's obviously going to be linked to that, but allows the reader time to build up to the more complex information that you want to communicate at the end of that sentence. Okay, so these are 4 very powerful academic writing practices, and even beyond academics, you can use these in all spheres of life to communicate better when you are writing something for somebody to read and who won't be able to give you feedback on how well they're absorbing and understanding what it is that you're writing down for them and that you want to communicate to them. Remember that in a conversation you have the luxury of real-time feedback from somebody, and you can change the level and the complexity of how you communicate to that person based on their feedback. But when you're writing for somebody to read at a later stage and a lot more of your information in a batch rather than in a conversation, you're going to have to focus a lot more on communicating well at the sentence level so that they can build up confidence and they don't get too exhausted as they're going through your writing. And if you apply these practices and you step back from your writing, you'll have quality writing that is practical and much easier for people to understand, while still doing justice to the important and often complex subjects that many of us in academia are studying. And in fact, the important nature of your topic demands that you write simply, because if you don't ensure that the reader can grasp that most complex topic, let's say that over here is the essence of that paragraph or that section or your page, if you're not doing all of these other things, you've lost the ability to communicate that most important complex topic to your reader. So I look forward to seeing you in the course on Double Your Academic Writing, tips to get finished. And remember, writing is also all about getting finished, but making sure that your reader gets value and enjoys and understands and comprehends everything that you're writing. Look forward to seeing you in the course so that you can learn more about all these practices. And I also teach a lot more, and there are handy worksheets for all of the lessons, and I go into a lot more detail on all of these practices and principles about how to double your academic writing quality.